Good afternoon, Professor Dhanda.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm also before you. At peace. I
Thank,
say,
yeah,
what what times, no? Where we can only be meeting across screens.
exactly.
Good
But
afternoon, Professor.
Good
thanks to
afternoon.
technological development that we can actually at least
Yes,
do
that's
this.
true. That's true. And we
Imagine
are
being
lucky
completely
enough that
cut
we
off.
can. Yes. Also, that we are lucky enough to be able to do it. It's not like
That's
everybody's
right.
got.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Can we go ahead and start, Dr. Amritalingam?
Yes, Professor.
All right. Okay. It is indeed an honor for me to be welcoming Professor Amita Dhanda to this penultimate session of the Faculty Improvement Program being conducted by the Tamil Nadu National Law University. I welcome Professor Amita Dhanda warmly to this program, and thank you so much for having accepted our invitation to address our participants in today's program, particularly having selected this topic, suitable tools for evaluation based upon your academic experience at Nalsar. And all the innovations that you have been carrying out there, we felt that you would be the ideal person to share with us, what are the kind of technology and techniques that we can use, which can go beyond, our traditional evaluation system. So thank you very much for having accepted our invitation to speak on this topic in today's session. I also welcome all the participants who have had two really long sessions in the morning and have signed in again right now in order to listen to Professor Amita Dhanda. And I welcome all my colleagues at TNNLU who are also attending this faculty improvement program. Now, just for a brief introduction of Professor Amita Dhanda, unlike many of us, Professor Amita Dhanda is deeply embedded in research. Most of us are just, regular teachers who have little or no experience with research. On the other hand, Professor Amita Dhanda comes from a research background, and as a consequence of which is the enormous amount of work she has done both before joining Nalsar and since on the publications to her credit, some of them path-breaking issues that she has written about, which are all extremely important for us. So Professor Dhanda began her career working with Justice Bhagwati in the Supreme Court, and after that at the Indian Law Institute, before she joined Nalsar as its first full-time professor in 1999. Since then, of course, she has carried out so many very interesting changes at Nalsar, both in terms of teaching as well as evaluation, the entire structure of the curriculum as well. All of this, which is what makes her the ideal resource person for today's function, today's program. And for me personally is also the fact that Professor Dhanda uses a feminist perspective from which she does all her work. And I've learned immensely from her writings as well as interactions. And therefore, I think for this particular faculty improvement program where we are looking at an interdisciplinary approach to the teaching of law, I don't think anyone better than Professor Amita Dhanda could possibly be addressing us, because she brings many strengths together. One is her research background, which is sadly lacking or so poor in the legal academia. Second is the rich experience of teaching and administration at Nalsar. And thirdly, the feminist perspective with which she does all her research and writing. Professor Dhanda's academic career, of course, is rooted in Delhi, where she completed her PhD from the University of Delhi in 1995, and her thesis was on a critical appraisal of the laws relating to the mentally ill, an area that she continues to be interested in, therefore researching and writing about. But her teaching and research have not been limited to this. She's particularly a very strong resource person and teacher in administrative law, jurisprudence, law and poverty, interpretation of statutes, law and literature, law and psychology, legal methods, and several elective courses or optional seminar courses, as we call them back at NLSRU, which are on related areas like pluralizing inclusion, equality and non-discrimination in globalizing world, pyramid and the web, questions of power and responsibility, rights and duties and the challenges of enforcement. And she's also taught applied jurisprudence and universalizing legal capacity, amongst others. Once again, thank you, Professor Amita Dhanda, and a warm welcome to this session. I hand the mic to you. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Can you see my presentation? I started to share it.
Yes, it's visible.
All right. Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Elizabeth. I always get very overwhelmed when you're, after an introduction, you almost feel like, because I feel when you're warmly, thanked at the end, maybe to say, okay, listen, you have proven true to your billing and you've done an okay job, then I'm all right. But before that, it only makes me nervous. But all the same, thank you very, very much. I mean, it's a very warm welcome and a great narration of all the various things I have dabbled in. And I think it's only appropriate that the penultimate session should be about evaluation, no? Because you've been studying, so to say, various kinds of things. So at the end of the day, we have what we call the exam. And so I thought it is appropriate. I mean, it's in several ways appropriate that this is your, the last session, the last scientific session before your valedictory, which again, as typically for Professor Elizabeth, is also not a traditional kind of valedictory. You're going to be doing serious work there too. All the same, I thought it's appropriate that when we start this whole question of looking at suitable tools for evaluation, before we look at the tools, we look at the perspective. It's important to be asking this very fundamental kind of question as to where do we situate evaluation in instruction. The scheme of my lecture I have on the slide here. I'm going to be firstly discussing, in my opinion, that to a great extent determines, what are suitable tools, is to firstly think in terms of where would you situate evaluation in instruction? What are the various components of evaluation? How do you design range of tests? How do you assess performance? And lastly, I'm saying, what are our learnings as teachers from the whole process of evaluation? So this is the schema I'm going to follow. I have, I think, about an hour and a half, but I would sort of like speak for maybe about 45 minutes to an hour. And then we I would definitely want half an hour of interaction with you, because I've always believed that a one-way street is a very, very boring exercise. And you come to all of these kinds of sessions, not just for what you may or may not be giving to people, but what you would get from them. And that's the discussion. That for me is always the, the thing which is the most attractive part of lecturing at different places, because, and especially I suppose the pandemic has done this for us, that the reaching out both nationally and internationally has become huge. People you may or may not have seen in years, you can think in terms of accommodating in the time and space that is available to us. Also, somewhere I do feel it's, at least for us academicians, it addresses the factor of not feeling so very alone. And I think we've kind of gone friendly with the screen. So I'm emphasizing on the fact of discussion and questions and comments and disagreements, because I think that's what makes this entire exercise worthwhile. So when I'm saying where do we situate evaluation in the process of education, I've kind of split the screen up into two parts. I'm talking in terms of that one way of looking at it is where you are, like you understand evaluation as testing the understanding efficacy of what you have taught. It's like you could say somewhere a hierarchical kind of an exercise, because you only think that the examinee is on test, not you. And largely, a lot of us believe that there is only one right answer and the examiner knows it. because we're discussing this particular, Professor Elizabeth mentioned, at the very start that you all are taking an interdisciplinary approach. And because you're taking an interdisciplinary approach, it's important that we also question this paradigm very often propounded in law, where we believe that there is one right answer. I mean, there is the whole business which came from Dworkin, where he was insistent upon the fact that there is only one right answer. But whether that's the way we should be teaching law or doing law is a different issue altogether. So and the other side, I have for you what I'm calling as, where evaluation is a participative exercise, a space to have conversation, a challenge for the examiner, as, let's say, what I'm trying to put out there is that in the second mode of doing evaluation, and I've said this several places, that if you look at the whole teaching process, if there is one process wherein, or one place or one space where teaching can happen, where you literally are on a one-to-one kind of an equation with your student. The ratio of teacher and student is exactly one-to-one. It is in the space of evaluation. And that's why it's a space to have conversation. It's like, you are somewhere posing a kind of a challenge to your examinee, that these are the kinds of issues which are of bother to me. How do you respond, react to them? Because I'm saying it's a space to have conversation, you're not seeing this as testing their understanding and efficacy, but more as to say, okay, this is something we have done over a period of time. It could be a semester, it could be a 1 credit or 2 credit course. It could be a year-long program that you're doing with them. There could be various, or it could be just like, something that you've done over a short course. But at the end of the day, this is one place where things which were bothering you in constructing the course is what you are setting up your conversation with the examinees on. So, and the other kind of thing is where how they attempt it, what they do there, what sort of response you get. You also get a feedback as an examiner. You have a, all of us try to do various things when we are teaching, and often we do not know whether this worked or did not. Occasionally, especially at the national schools, we have relatively more outspoken students. So they'll make it a business to tell us exactly whether it worked or not. But in the main, I would say, even at national law schools, because we have an internal evaluation system, our students very often say to us what they think we want to hear from them. But an examination paper, and there also sometimes they do mess up. They try to give to us, and when I later on talk in terms of tests and what are the things, evaluation of tests, and what are the things one has to watch out for. This is amongst the things I would put out on the table. But irrespective of that, if we see this as a way of us getting an assessment of what worked and what did not work in our courses, then the way we look at evaluation is not just about the student getting evaluated, but to some extent, us, we are also on the line, I will make a personal confession. I am so scared. I'm scared to correct papers because I've never thought it as something that I am testing the students on. It's much more what I'm testing myself on. Okay, if they've really, really got it wrong, then I got it really, really wrong. And that's scary. That's worrisome. But at the same time, it's true that, somewhere the most intense kind of feedback on both your teaching and what you're doing then comes in the exam paper. And because I'm stressing on, and Professor Elizabeth did stress on the fact of that I have an interdisciplinary bent of mind, and also because of the whole feminist perspective, I see knowledge as a very democratic exercise. I don't see it as the repository of only the teacher, or something which only reposes in the teacher, and the students are a set of buddhus who don't know anything, and we are out there just to, feed them up with things. There is this whole, all of us have looked at that banking method of teaching, a large extent of what happens on this side of the screen when you're testing understanding efficacy is that you had deposited something in their minds, and then at the exam time, you're encashing it, or you're asking them to give it back. Or what students say that, oh, come, go there and like they would say that it's only about vomiting out all that we have been fed, over the course, and then you just have to give it back. But if you are saying that there is another kind of exercise happening when we are both teaching and we are evaluating, then you are looking at more than one right answer. You construct your questions accordingly, that I'll come to later. But I do think that it's important somewhere in our heads to understand that there are at least these two models. I'm not saying they are the only two as I move further, but it helps to sort of keep on board this particular idea that evaluation can be just about the examinee and we sitting on our thrones and, like our pulpits and out there saying, okay, you're right or you're not right, kind of that's mode of doing things. Or it can be the last conversation maybe you're having with your students in relation to that particular course that you're teaching. So then it's not just about them, it's as much about you. It's not just about what you taught them, but what they taught you. And what is it that both of you all learned in the whole process? And I do think it's more of it on this side than there is on that side. And that's the first point I want to make with you. I'm also sort of my slide. Oh, yeah. To take this particular conversation further, I would also want you to take, like that I put it out more firstly because I also use that kind of, I divided the screen and I spoke about 2 points of view. I'm not saying that the question need not be answered in an either or, this or that kind of way, that, okay, either you are on this side of the screen or you're on that side. Either you follow this understanding, like trying to understand students' comprehension or how effective the entire learning process was, how much do they know, they don't know, and like that. Or it is also possible to think in terms of mixing and matching both these approaches. It's important somewhere to be open to that idea that, okay, and the reason I'm also saying is this, that if you know that both these approaches are possible or should be in fact addressed, there are certain things, maybe the first approach is a better approach, wherein if you bring in too much of democratization, you might have a set of confused students who don't really, like the very basic kind of things which as law students, they need to be knowing. They don't even know those and they stumble around. And in fact, one of the criticisms, at least a leading scholar has made against scholars of national law schools is that they don't know law. They know all the other kinds of, which basically just means that there is at least a component in law, which is the right answer component, wherein a certain grip is needed, even if you want to dismantle it, even if you want to critique it, even if you want to rework it, you need to firstly know what are you trying to do. If you don't even know that, then evidently you fall between two stools, and that's something to watch for. And that's why I'm not necessarily saying you have to be one or the other. But what I am saying is this: you need to be aware that these are two kinds of objectives. How exactly are you going to take out which piece from this one and which piece from the other one to go ahead and look at your entire perspective? I'm also saying, this understanding of what each approach provides is important as we try to devise suitable tools for evaluation. I feel if you come too soon to devising tools without having really asked yourself this fundamental principle, I would say it's both a question of ideology as well as somewhere a question of technique and method, is because you can't really work out what suits you, what kind of innovation you need to use or not need to use, without really asking yourself, okay, how do I see education? Where do I see evaluation in this whole process? And exactly, because the manner in which you teach is the manner in which you examine. And it's important to be asking yourself exactly, how do I teach? And whichever way you teach, how can you maximize it? But in that maximizing, it could well be that, the icing on top for you is the other approach, the one which you don't usually use, or is the appropriate one in what you're trying to teach there. I mean, as we go further, and especially as at the discussion stage, when we start talking in terms of what are the various kinds of courses that we do and for which kind of course, what sort of methodology of evaluation would be an appropriate one, I think this particular, these two slides with which I have started my conversation with you would possibly fall in place or make more sense. I've also always felt the same holds good for when we are devising our courses. You firstly ask, what's the objective of my course? Because after you ask that question, can you then settle up, okay, what readings should I put in there? What methodology should I use? And then what should be the process of evaluation? That's a follow-up kind of question, and they're all connected. We can't speak about this without speaking about the other two. Now, in terms of components of evaluation, I would somewhere, and this is like, in the national schools, we make a lot of thing about is that what we say, we do continuous evaluation. If we do continuous evaluation, or if we do periodic, we'll have a mid-semester, an end semester, or a first test, or tests like which come in at 3 or 4 levels of frequency. Or at NALSA, at one point of time, we had what was called the surprise test. And the irony of it is that the so-called surprise test was something that, everybody knew. What is the no, sir? Is it to me or is it some other conversation? I'd also have an identity issue if it's sir.
Professor, the slides aren't moving forward. We are still seeing the title slide. So I just wanted to confirm.
Okay, I am moving them. And it's saying you're sharing.
We still see the title slide with your name on, Professor.
Oh God, let me just go back and see what happened.
Yes, ma'am. Now it's moving.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, no, this is the last slide, so I better go back to.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this was the slide I was, in fact, this you should see, because this is where I was talking about this side of the screen and that side of the screen kind of thing, because I had split it up into saying that, all right, you can look at tests as evaluating tests and understanding efficacy, and then evaluation as a part of, participation or democratization of education and stuff like that. So this entire thing was coming from there. Now, this is the one where I said that you can be, can do situate evaluation in the process of education. You don't have to look at this as an either or question. A mix and match is possible. And I was at this slide when you've now alerted me. Thank God you didn't do that at the end of it. I would have been really, really riled up if I'd come to know at the end that the slides are not moving. Okay, so I am saying is that when we speak in terms of continuous evaluation, and we pride ourselves very much on the fact at the law schools that we are continuously evaluating our students. So the logic for each of them then would be that if you are doing continuous, then you can't, the continuity needs to be so woven in that the student is not all of the time feeling that they are, what's it called? They're on the mark kind of things. It's not a great. I was just talking to you about the surprise test, and what we had this surprise test, which was supposedly to happen any time 1 month after the semester had begun. And the only thing which remained as a surprise was that they knew exactly when it was going to happen. They did not know which test that was going to happen. So they were all going crazy with the fact of that, at least in the first 2-3 tests, when the suspense was still there would be this guessing thing of which is the test tomorrow. Otherwise, they have to look through their entire set of things, because the way in which our education system functions, doing well and badly in an exam is like, it's literally, you know, you're standing and falling as a student. It's whether you understood the subject or not. But if you got yourself an outstanding, that's fair. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of saying that we're going to have a continuous evaluation, which necessarily means that that continuous evaluation can't be devised in the same manner in which you would do a periodic one or an annual one. Because if you are going to be testing on a constant basis, then that testing should become like play. It should become like a part of the whole learning process, even more than the others. And that's very often not understood. So what landed up happening for us was that in that 1 week, though it was supposed to be that you did not have, classes were not suspended, you were just going to have the test in any of the hours of the day. And so consequently, students had they paid no attention to what was happening to the courses, the classes which were supposedly happening. Because then they carried on with this thing of that, okay, till the 5 or 6 classes that we used to have are not over, they would be dying of anxiety as to, are they going to have an exam in the next one or they're not going to have one? Then we kind of did the first level of reform and said, okay, first hour. That too did not help very much, because then it became that, all right, having done an exam in the first hour, they were most disinclined to want to go back to studies in the remaining hours. Ultimately, we kind of came to a point where we collapsed the mid-semester and the first test and just started to have one and had no classes. To say, okay, if we are testing and this is what's happening, let us all kind of just concentrate on it. I'm only sharing this with you from the standpoint of that it's no point in saying this is what we are trying to do without like going ahead and creating that shell, but the substance is robbed. Because if you are doing it, it's the same kind of thing that you landed happening. People were saying we do an open book, and in the open book exam we ask all the closed book questions, so they have the book on them. And you're asking them the kind of question which they can just go to a specific page and take it down. In the early eras at Nalsar, we had this as a very real problem. Till a point where students started to understand in an open book exam, the answer is not in the book. It is that the book is an aid to your finding the answer, but you need to be knowing exactly what what is the larger objective or learning that you're trying to put there. So one is this whole business of periodicity, and the frequency at which you're doing it necessitates the way in which you design the test. Like I said, if you are doing continuous evaluation, it should be like a fun kind of thing which is happening there, like where they are getting tested too, and yet it's not like, okay, all life comes to standstill. Which is difficult for us to do, largely because whether it's a class of 60 or it's a class of 80 or it's a class of 40, it's like, you need to be, as a teacher, having mechanisms by which you are focusing attention on different people at different times, because it's really not possible. Like people give marks for class participation or give things for, okay, how active have you been or how regular you are in your readings. And then you also have this one very big difficulty sometimes of there are students who are very actively engaged in the class, but are not great speakers. They don't talk so much. But is it really possible for us to see nonverbal participation? And if we don't see nonverbal participation, can we say that we are doing continuous evaluation? The point I'm trying to sort of like emphasize upon is that constantly we need to keep making this link, that if we are saying this is what we are trying to achieve, then we have to see whether what we have devised to achieve that is apposite for it. Is it a suitable tool? The other thing that I'm saying is that, you can't sort of talk in terms of, when you're talking about components of evaluation, I would take both of these on board. Like exactly how are you designing your test? Are you doing a take home? Are you giving them a group exercise? Are you giving them, like what I would say, just like 2 questions or a response paper or a quiz or a multiple choice? These are so many different ways in which we can be designing the test. So again, we need to be asking, okay, if this is how we are designing our test, why are we designing it so? What is it that I want to test them on? If supposing I've just taught a very, very technical part of the law, and I really want them to know that those techniques are exactly the kinds of, sometimes it might just well be the latest information on the law. That's all that I need to know. Maybe a multiple choice or a quiz of that kind may serve that purpose better. Or it's also possible that I develop one complex problem and then tell them, okay, now you sort of, all the things that I have taught you, you find what is a relevant principle or relevant provision here and apply it. I have a specific objective as to what am I trying to test there, and the designing of the test needs to be in harmony with that particular objective that I want to serve. The next is the whole business of assessment of the output. How do you evaluate? I mean, I'm going to look at that separately, but I just wanted to flag on here that these for me are three components. What is the periodicity of, I'm really stumbling on this one today, of the test that you're going to do? How are you going to, what is the, like in that I would say also, what is the length that you're going to give? What is the time duration that you're going to give them the test for? Like it is like, see, the whole project system that we have, in a manner of speaking, is testing a way of how do you do research, how do you consult libraries, how do you write in your own language, how do you organize, what sort of structure, and you're giving them time. It's literally, whichever way you do those projects, like amongst the things that we have done, maybe I'll talk about that when I come to the whole designing of tests, but I am just wanting you to sort of like keep clued in on this factor of that every kind of test doesn't test the same thing. Considering there is a difference in what you are testing, one needs to be then asking, which is the one I want to use? And what is the frequency at which I decided to give up on periodicity? I didn't do too badly, though I had to literally halt and pronounce it. But I'm saying, what is the frequency at which you wish to do? Again, has a logic for what is it that you are trying to achieve in your course. And then the whole question of designing of tests and assessment of output is what I'm going to discuss with you in the next 2 slides. Now, designing tests, it's like there are various ways in which the testing procedure can be designed. And some of it I've already spoken to when I was discussing in the previous slide. But I think largely, what is the objective of the course? What is it that you wanted that at the end? I always say, when I'm putting down objectives in my course, I'm saying, I usually say these are the 2 things. This is the one thing they must learn. They must really know at the end of this course. That for me is the most critical part. Yeah, Jeshri, you're saying something? Has the slide not turned again?
It's fine, sir. It's fine.
Okay. I suppose I'm gone paranoid now, so it's like what is the 1 or 2 things that you want to learn, want them to teach, want them to learn at the end of your course. Like I used to have this for my administrative law. When I used to teach administrative law, I had literally a single objective when I was teaching administrative law, that my students should be able to recognize a problem as a problem of administrative law. Because we all know administrative law is like a subject which has no defined terrains. You have administrative law questions arising everywhere. You could be, teaching environment, or you could be teaching taxation, or you could be teaching education or banking or whatever. There could be an administrative law question arising there. So it is an important part of studying administrative law that you should be able to say, this is a banking question and this is an administrative law question in banking. And I kind of felt it was important that my students should be able to recognize that this is an administrative law question, and hence I need to be, looking at all my learnings in administrative law to address that part of the question. Now, of course, now not increasingly now, when administrative law was identified as a discipline, and you go in around the 60s, 70s, and you look at the law reporters, they did not even have a subject heading which spoke in terms of, is there a difficulty somewhere?
Jayashri has to be muted. I think she has unmuted inadvertently.
May I request all the participants to kindly mute yourselves, please? Otherwise, it
because
keeps disturbing the
the
speaker,
echo
right? We
is
keep
like
thinking that
this.
somebody wants to talk.
Yeah.
Ms. Jayashree, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Thank you all.
So because I had this particular objective, I found it necessary that the test I was designing had to be a problem wherein from which they needed to, eke out the issue of administrative law and then make the connection on, okay, if this is a natural justice question, or this is a question about exercise of discretion, or it's something to do with delegated legislation, but the context could be just anything. I think Bakshi says in his introduction to Massey's administrative law that whilst nobody can be an expert in law without knowing administrative law, no one can really be an expert in administrative law. But at the same time, because questions of administrative law pop up everywhere, and we all know that these subject divisions are pedagogic reasons. It's not like when we go out to practice in court, or we are kind of like generally trying to address an issue. We will say, oh, this is something that I will only address when I'm studying administrative law. And these are the things that I will do in relation to banking and education and licensing and what have you. They come all melded up. They come all mixed up. So you need to be able to kind of, take out the respective strands and say, okay, this particular part. Also, one finds that and the reason I'm a little bit spending more time on administrative law, just as an interpretation of statutes and things, what you find is this, that these are those areas of law for which there is not a statute. And you find that most law teachers, and for students also, if you don't have a statute, then you are, the area in which you are trying to study a subject is very, very large. So you need to have some kind of basic technique that has to be, provided to the students to be able to traverse that area. And the testing needs to then sort of like check out whether they understood. I'm giving you this as one example that I found very, on another hand, similar kind of thing held good for interpretation of statutes. You'd find, and this is, I don't know whether, I've tried to rectify in the book that I've done on interpretation, but largely you'd find in interpretation of, especially the revisions which come, you keep like a mantra, you're just kind of repeating the rule or the canon of construction. So, okay, it is the mischief rule. And you'll say, oh, in this particular case, they use the mischief rule. In another case, they use the mischief rule. In the fifth case, they used it. Here they say, no, it doesn't apply. Here they said it applies. But that Hayden's rule is kind of repeated on like it's just repeated again and again. That's really, if nothing else, it's very boring. So what we need to be getting across when we are doing interpretation is this, that you need to be understanding that there are a set of facts and there is some kind of a legal text involved. The legal text could be a statute. The legal text could be a judgment. But you need to be able to sort of work out, okay, and these are the canons of construction. So in this particular factual situation, how did the judges use which canon of construction? Why did they use this one and not that one? And you can't really sort of assess why they use this one or that one or not that one without having some kind of a instruction or judicial process as a very integral part of your teaching of interpretation of statutes. Again, I would say that in order to assess whether they've understood or not, you have to, perforce provide for problems, questions, or even the teaching of it somewhere needs to be in a more kind of, say, argumentative manner, to be demonstrating to students that there is no one way to go back. to what the first slide that I had done with you on, where exactly do you situate evaluation as a part of your instruction? Because interpretation as such demonstrates to you that on exactly the same statutory provisions, there were at least 5 or 7 different kinds of interpretations that courts had given. If the canons were supposed to be determinative, then how did this happen? And the fact that this can happen means that it's always possible to address the legal text from different stances. So what we are teaching our students, at least what I've been teaching my students when I teach them interpretation, is that there is this particular authoritative decision of the Supreme Court of India, maybe. But I am convinced that the Supreme Court didn't really get it so very right. Then if it did not get it right, is there an alternative way of writing that decision or thinking on that question? What is it that I should draw upon to be able to do so? Imagine of all the people, I've forgotten her name in the moment. Elizabeth, the feminist author who's done that work on the age of sexual harassment, and have you?
McKinnon.
Yeah. So she has this, one very fascinating article that she wrote, where she was asked that, okay, if you were given the freedom to rework the curriculum from a feminist perspective, what would you do? And her response to that was primarily just that she said, one of the things that I will never do is I will not add woman and stir, which means that I am going to very foundationally and fundamentally ask those same questions from, like if I'm going to be teaching judicial process, or if I'm going to be teaching the whole issue of precedent in common law countries, one of the first thing as a feminist that I am going to do is that I am going to say that these decisions were made without hearing me. And hence this kind of privileged position that is given to precedents, you foundationally question. If you teach that to your students and you teach them, okay, this is the way in which the theory of precedent has operated and the whole issue of ratio and arbiter and all of that. But the fact that you've also taught her, and you kind of also spoken on these questions, you've given that, you opened up to be saying that it's possible to say that whatever precedents which had been established at a point of time were established without, really hearing the people who were as much affected by it. So McKinnon's entire exposition foundationally questions the whole area of precedent and says that, okay, if you are studying it, you should know how it operates, but you should also know what is the kind of disadvantage that theory unleashes on a whole range of excluded populations. I'm also saying this because I'm connecting it with, so consequently, when feminists started to look at the relationship between, between law and gender, they started to rewrite judgments. They said, okay, if you had heard, and that rewriting, that process of rewriting, which is a research project elsewhere, can be a very integral part of how we teach, and also can be an integral part of how we design tests. So to be saying that, okay, now you rework this, you look at, I think Ratna Kapoor at some point says that she has very often got judgments where you agreed with the conclusion, but you hated the reasoning. And we all know that, of course, we have stare decisis and not dictis. So it is actually the decision which is like binding, not the reasoning. But the reasoning is where from. The reasoning creates discourse. The reasoning is where from you think about a question or you don't think about it. So one can work out, if that's what you're wanting to do. If I'm teaching a course in feminist jurisprudence, it becomes an important part for me that my students should not be either just critiquing and saying, this is unfair, unjust, oppressive, exclusive, but they should actually be made to sit there on that judge's chair and say, acha, theek hai. Now let's see how you will rework it. It's like testing imagination, testing creativity, testing the fact that yes, it's possible to talk about these questions in a manner where you're not just spouting whatever has been authoritatively held and saying such and such judgment of the Supreme Court of India, or these 4 judgments of the Supreme Court of India are this to say, and hence I am necessarily, I can't disagree with the Supreme Court, so I just have to reproduce what they had to say. But if you have been teaching them the other, then you're testing, you can't be then asking at what the Supreme Court said. So I'm just trying to put forth is that if the objective of the course was to stretch imagination, then the exam or the way in which you design your test has also to do the same. Because if you are not doing that, I mean, that's something I suppose I should have started out with. We like it, we don't. The kinds of grades that our students get in whatever we test them on determines a large part of their life opportunities. For us, maybe it is one test. For them, at that point of time, it sort of virtually determines what they are going to do with their lives, how well they have done, what is the grade point average that they've got, and all of those kinds of things. Now we can either just say, oh my God, these guys are only interested in tests, or we can use it as a resource to be able to, proceed further with them. Which would basically mean, I would tell my students very often, I said, all right, my colleagues who are teaching you the more technical subjects, you have to give to them whatever they are asking for. So, and that's the only way you do well. So if gaming the system is something which you are up to, then this is what I'm asking for. So if you don't think in my courses, or you don't think in what I'm asking, you don't read my question, you just reproduce something which you think is required, then you're not going to do well. And so you use that fact that it is such high value for them to be able to push them in the direction which you think, at least for you, is important or is valuable. Because we like it, we don't. Large part of what we teach them in law could well be out of date by the time they graduate. So information, evidently when we are teaching, the most current information has to be provided. But it has to be provided with the equipment that, okay, when this information changes, you still know how to process the new information. And if they know to teach them how to process new information, we need to not just teach them how to do it, but we need to test them on how to do it. And the reason why I'm saying is it's important to recognize the importance of evaluation, because for them, the kind of grades that they obtain is very high importance in their scheme of things. So if we sort of try to say, oh my God, these people, I can say myself, of course, most of the time I get impatient with students who's got a 8 point or something in their scores and then comes to you and asks you, how can I improve myself? And they say, no, you can't improve, you're beyond repair. Because it's like not that kind of a, wherein, grades are all that matter and they kind of haggle with you for every point that they want. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, it's also important that they are important for them. So if we teach in a particular way and test in another kind of a way, then we kind of defeat our own teaching. And hence it becomes important for us to look at, what was the objective of the course, and the testing procedure needs to marry that. I have here a set of general guiding principles that I gave you 2 examples from courses I teach as to why is it that I would want to go in there. I also said that, that you can, if for a specific point of time on a particular component, information is the way you want to go, then possibly more straightforward questions are in order. But I have here what I consider to be like, general guiding principles in devising tests. The first I'm putting out here is we need to be recognizing the diversity of the student body and provide space for all intelligences. I'm sort of saying this that I suppose Howard Gardner and his entire theory of multiple intelligences is something we used in how we changed our entire expectation in relation to projects. earlier when we used to have projects as such, they had to do a project for every subject. They still have to do it. But like what we would do there is that, nearly everybody was asking for that similar kind of analytical research-based, or more or less a compilation around an issue kind of project. We started to change that and sort of said, okay, fine. You look at newspapers, look at how law gets represented in newspapers. Let us see you culling out a legal issue from a newspaper and saying, what is it that we are, what is the legal information that is out there in newspapers for people at large? We used to do it in our legal methods course virtually. I mean, we used to do it, especially in the first 2 years of our students studying, more to be saying that, okay, you start to learn how, if you're teaching them legal methods, you teach them how to start, recognizing legal issues where they find them. So that was one kind of an objective you're putting out there. You were also somewhere, trying to bring up, let's say, trying to nurture a kind of a law student who doesn't talk in a manner which nobody understands. So you learn how to speak about law in everyday language, in how people at large would comprehend. And once you learn it, then your hereinbefores and hereinafters and notwithstandings are not such an integral part of your vocabulary. So we thought that the newspaper analysis and the projects around that asked for a certain kind of application of intelligence of a very different kind than when you are just given a topic and you go and look at a set of books and you write it out. We asked for film reviews. We asked them to go and interview people. To say that now, and in the interviewing of people, it was not just that, and used to say that, no, I mean, we are going to evaluate you not on the answers, because the answers you haven't given, it's the interview is given it. But it's the questions that you create there. And how much reading did you do in preparing those questions? What is the kind of struggles you had in getting that interview? So to getting an appointment and to say, okay, if you get an appointment because your mommy or your daddy knows somebody, then I'm not going to give you any credit for it. But if you have struggled for it, the phone calls you made and the techniques and what are the various things you did to be able to obtain that interview is an integral part of your evaluation, because you need to know how to deal with people. And, we had at the end of the day only one essay, which in any subject, or we brought in a whole bidding system wherein these 5 of different kinds of projects were devised. And the intensity that was that each of them required was different, but they were given that kind of choice where you gave them some 250 points and you said you bid for the project. And so necessarily you use your points in a manner so that you get the project that you want to do in a particular subject. And again, a way of like learning learning what you like to do, Very often, because you're all the time told this is what you have to do, you don't even know what is it that you really want to do. And I think one learns how to make choices if choices are given. Otherwise, you don't have an option on that. The point somewhere I was trying to make is that I found that certain students who really messed it up for the analytical essay did brilliantly for the film review, because it looked like that was a text which they really related to. And there were others who were like way better in any kind of legwork kind of work. There were people. So you found that as you changed the ways in which, or what you were demanding from them, the privileging that we had done of one kind of intelligence started to come down. In the beginning, we even got protests for some students and saying, but I don't really much care for this. I said, yeah, but the other person didn't care for that one. And for so long, the system was privileging you. Now, if it is trying to level the playing field, I don't see what's the issue. And the fact of this kind of diversity, acknowledging the fact that everybody doesn't learn the same way, hence everyone shouldn't be tested the same way, brought in some kind of opportunity, let's say, to all kinds of intelligences. The other sort of thing that I want to also really stress upon is that we can't teach like, our students are just people sitting on chairs. They're people who come with histories. They're people who come with their own experience of prejudice and oppression. And I don't think that the affirmative action programs and the fact that we've admitted people from this kind of diverse backgrounds finishes our duties. And that duty necessarily needs to come in how we design our tests. I think Patricia Williams has this fascinating essay that she had done on the way in which the names that you use when you're creating problems. If you are intent on, say, like she had this thing off where all kinds of horrible things were being done by a Black man. And the teacher was asking the individual to then argue for the culpability of that Black man. And you're a Black person writing it, and you're experiencing this kind of oppression on an everyday basis. To then expect that student to be able to do a convincing job of it is not a very fair way of proceeding. Because you can't say, oh, but this is just a hypothetical question. It's not hypothetical to the person who's being examined. And the fact that it's not hypothetical to the person who's being examined is a reality that we need to be aware of. We can't be oblivious of this prejudice and this oppression. So I literally sort of like feel it's important. I would do things like, names of sweets like barfi and jalebi and what have you, or ABCD or whatever, but be very careful when you're using names as to what do they signify. Who are you kind of in some manner, stereotyping and excluding all over again. The other thing that I've also I've said it very often is that, when people are allocating time for a question, especially when you're having the standard form 3-hour or 3.5-hour question paper, they would put in some 20 questions or 20 questions or 10 questions, and they would sort of say, isko to 10 minute hi lagenge, isko to 5 minute lagenge. What you are doing there, I'm sorry, this will just take 10 minutes or 5 minutes. That's not the way that you have to be thinking about it, because what you are not budgeting for is the time that you want that person to at least think on what they are writing. If you are giving a problem question and providing no thinking time, then you are necessarily going to get, irrespective of how creative the question was, you are going to get an answer which has been breathlessly written because the student is desperately trying to complete the question paper. And I think it's in designing a test, in designing a question paper, this is something which must be taken into account. The last thing I have here is also that keep space for some fun. Sometimes, it's like some kind of a de-stressor, that's one. And in another way of looking at it as de-stressing and going to this whole question of diversity, I would also say that, it's important to not think about your most brilliant students only, but also not think of only the ones who would just be able to do the bare minimum. I think that mix match in the way in which the questions are designed is important. That exercises are designed is important. Everybody must get a look in. Everybody must get an opportunity of at least doing their best. Whatever is their best. I'm not saying necessarily unleashing a competition, but if you don't give even a look into students, it's not a very fair way to go. And often we don't think about it because we are, this is what I covered in my syllabus, and as a result of which, I must ask questions where everything in the syllabus must be out there. How you use an alternative question, how do you collapse areas to be asking a question, and then to see the fun, whether they'll be able to find it or not. At the same time, keep the space for that straightforward question, which just asks what, you feel that this is a minimum that the student must know. I do think that that's amongst the things that I would take on board for how you design a test. Now, in assessing performance, which is the other component I feel in tools of evaluation, for a very long time, I realized that when you say, supposing you had, though we have a grading system is meant to correct that. I don't know how you all operate at Trichy, but largely I find is that though we have a grading system, everybody starts with marks and then just converts them to grades, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a grading system. But it's important somewhere in looking at how when we are grading is to move downwards from the maximum. if you have said this is a 10-mark question, or it's a 20-mark question, or a 25-mark question, you begin from 25 and then you go down as, okay, you didn't do this, so you're 24, you're 23, you're 20, you're coming to. But if you sort of say it is supposedly a 25 question, but nobody can get 25 and 25, so we'll begin from 23, or we'll begin from 22 and then start marking. And that's not really, which is wherein I suppose the 1 to 10, your scale there, a 10-point scale makes sense accordingly, because then you are making a distinction between, say, if from 80 to 100, everybody is getting an outstanding, then you're not distinguishing between the people at the top. And that's not the way to go. If we really want to stretch, and I'm kind of clear, I definitely want space for people who are disadvantaged, but I also don't think that it's appropriate that people who can perform out of their skin and do certain things which are absolutely brilliant should not get that opportunity. And it's important to remember both as we're going around. The caution of the mirror effect is the point I was making with you earlier when I was saying that one of the things which happens when you say there is only one right answer is that you have at least a couple of students in every classroom who will copy every single word you say in class. And then that particular notes will be, if it's a generous class, will be photocopied and distributed all around. If not so generous, then maybe a few of them will have it. And you will have yourself being mirrored back to you. I think they'll tell you that whatever's flattery is whatever. It's that kind of, all of us believe that when we speak, we are kind of like only pearls are falling. And hence, when you get back what you had taught them, I have seen lots and lots of teachers who would kind of really, really mark students very high if that's what happens. What has the student done? Just memorized and reproduced. Does that deserve that kind of credit? And is this not a certain kind of a nepotism of its own kind, because he's smart enough to give you that flattery and you're getting flattered? I mean, we also know that ultimate flattery line up. You have somebody who cannot be flattered, and how flattered we feel by that. I don't think that's something that we need to be like cognizant of or careful about. The other is space for what I say disagreement. It's important, especially when we're doing those problem questions. I don't know whether Professor Elizabeth remembers, but in one of our feminist jurisprudence, when we were trying to devise that feminist jurisprudence course, there was this one anxiety which was constantly felt, that, okay, in how you devise your exams, you're wanting students to engage with feminist jurisprudence. But say in that engagement, they disagree with what you are putting out there. How should they be evaluated? It's an important, I'm sort of saying that at least, like what's the reasoning that the person, not that because you are averse to it and you really, really dislike what they're saying, still how well it has been argued or not is some kind of a space often you may have to create. Or the question has to be so devised that at least he has to engage. If the person has not even engaged with the jurisprudence and it's only the prejudice that is speaking, that disagreement one doesn't give space for. But if it's a disagreement wherein you've gone and, like also searched for materials which are saying otherwise, a lot of research has gone for it, not to score a point, but because maybe that's what you want to do. I think that space for disagreement needs to be taken into account when we're assessing performance. I have these three things on the issue of subjectivity, especially for a lot of us, because we are teaching in residential schools. We know our students, of course, with fictitious numbers and all that stuff. Very often when we are correcting their exam papers, we don't necessarily know exactly whose paper is which one. Some people do. I don't. I mean, I think different teachers have different kinds of skills on being able to recognize handwritings in others. But when it comes to a large part of their research assignments and otherwise, we do know whose paper we are correcting. I think in that, these are the things that I would sort of want us to keep in mind. One is the halo effect. One is that absolutely bright, brilliant student, even when he turns in a rotten paper, just because he's that brilliant student, he lands up getting many more marks than you would give to a student who you consider to be lazy or not smart or whatever. And I do think that we need to be, just as I was talking about the mirror effect, I think we need to be recognizing our own humanness. And the fact that, though it's not like something we deliberately do, but it's something which happens to us, like it happened, where you'd say, oh, so and so is a teacher's pet. Like when you're in school, that's the kind of thing that you'd land up saying. It's not like it doesn't happen in universities, and especially in close-knit spaces like ours, where our interaction with our students is way more intimate and way more, there's much more frequency of interaction. So you know them by name, you know them like literally from the first year to when they graduate. And that's a fact, especially for the undergrads. And for the master's students, relatively, we don't have that many exams and the whole thing functions differently. So I've kind of, most of my talk today has focused on the undergrads. I think the postgrads and what we need to do there has to be possibly addressed separately. Some of the things I've discussed here would be relevant, but there'll be others that we would need to bring on board. The other thing, as a reason of that, I would still say in the whole issue of subjectivity, I would, my God, and I said I'll finish in 1 hour. I'm so sorry. I'll quicken it up now. Like the whole question of rewarding effort. If a student has done as good as they could have done, I don't think that we should take cognizance of it. And on the other hand is also, I'm saying, the whole question of recognizing hardship. It's important to be also doing that. Like occasionally, especially, during the pandemic, I think if we have not taken on board the difficulties that different people have faced at different places and points, then the whole evaluation system, it may be like what you could say neutral, objective, and efficient, but it's definitely not just. And I think that's a question that we need to be addressing. I have found that if you are providing reasons for your evaluation in as many places, it helps. Because largely if students believe that what you're doing is not at whim and is not capricious, there's greater acceptance. And the greater the acceptance of the evaluation, the more the learning that comes from there. I have really gone way beyond my time, so I'm going to do this one. Literally, it's something I introduced the whole conversation with you with, that it's actually feedback for both about us and the students. I've got little typical things, that if everyone, or say we've put in a question and nearly most of the class has got it wrong, then sometimes it's important to be going back and saying, is the question that I drafted, could it be read only this way, or was another interpretation possible? As a teacher of interpretation, I know that it happens all the time, that you think this is what I have said and this is what I'm asking for. So if you have not given me what I've asked for, then I can't give you marks for it. But if large parts of the class is doing otherwise, then you need to be sort of seeing whether either how you taught it or how you have drafted your questions, is there something not right there? If too many standard form answers are coming, then possibly we designed a paper which didn't have enough challenge. The other feedback I also find, and again, because of the fact that, we teach, we examine, it's the one-on-one relationship means it just demonstrates to you exactly where the student is struggling and what maybe needs to be rectified in either the teaching method or in the material that one is using. I feel that evaluation provides us data on what is working and what is not. And it's as much about the teacher as the student. I'm really sorry I have at least gone 10 minutes or 15 minutes ahead of where I wanted to stop. But I'm through with my presentation and look forward to whatever time we have left to some questions, agreements, disagreements, whatever. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhanda. So participants, any questions or clarifications if anyone has, please go ahead.
Professor, this is Vishnu Prasad here, Professor. I had
Yes.
one small clarification to seek. This is regarding the problem-based, question paper. Very often, teachers do set the problem, but it would continue to be a problem for the teachers because students sometimes, they don't understand what is expected as a response in the problem. Either they write it in a very general manner, or they go and stick on to one particular point alone. So for the assessment, it would be a problem in that sense. So we can't give marks because what is expected is not written. And we cannot refrain also because there are a few general points. So any advice in this regard?
See, I would somewhere say, go back and look at the question. I've often found that the way in which the problem is devised, you create a problem. Then you have what you're specifically seeking from the student in doing that problem, in attempting that problem. If that those particular instructions are not clear, then they have no idea as to what you want them to answer on. So it's not, it's like if you are saying that, like whatever is the problem you have created and you're saying, okay, what is it? There's a relationship, say, between this particular thing and that. It may be better to be asking it, I often do this, that, you create a narrative and then you say, okay, looking at relevant, this thing you decide. That's one way of doing it. But the thing somewhere is this, that you've not really provided them with any cues on what you want as an answer. And, it's like even when we ask for essay questions, simple things like, are you wanting them to describe, explain, elaborate, question, analyze? That instruction, that final thing is actually which is telling them what they are meant to do. If you don't do that, then it possibly is why they are struggling. And especially in the first instance, when you are introducing them to doing problem questions, it's important that these other instructions are more sharply given. My own experience of at least 10, 7, 8 years of moderation, not necessarily, I found that this is wherein the greatest stumbling happens. You don't give that further instruction. You have something in your mind, but it has not been put on paper. At least, go back, if I'm right, at least my own experience of looking at people's question papers, I found that the moment we altered it, the kind of responses that we started to get from students also improved.
Right, Professor. Thank you. And I had another small clarification to seek.
Yeah,
May I,
sure.
Professor?
Yeah, please go ahead.
You spoke about the continuous internal assessment, and even our Vice Chancellor keeps mentioning that student feedback should be the way forward. I mean, they should know, besides learning and being assessed, they should know where they have gone wrong. But sometimes, it would be a difficult task for the teachers, irrespective of the number of years of, teaching to claim for. You would see that, when multiple courses are being taught and there is a group of 60 to 70 students and 3 courses to be taught, it becomes really difficult because we have to give them feedback.
True,
So
true.
is there any way that, you had handled such a situation, you can share that experience?
Okay, Dr. Vishnu Prasad, what I found was, it's like for me more like a habit, it's not a thing. I just keep writing what I find right and wrong when I'm evaluating a paper, because I find I can't reach a grade if I have not done that writing. But I'm not recommending it that everybody does it. But what I found useful is that I don't do what I call a answer key. That is, I don't have an answer key saying for this question, this is what I'm expecting as an answer. Because if I'm saying that, then it goes back to this factor of that there is this one right answer. What happens to the student who's given an answer which was not in my mind, but which is It's a creative answer. It's a good answer. It's a well-reasoned answer. So what I do is I do a results key. And I do a results key and I share it with and say that, okay, if you are in this band, like from 8 to 10, then this is what the question was asking. And this is the kind of thing that you have done. So people who have done these things have got here. If you've done this, then you are in the 6 to 8. Then you have, and accordingly, right up to the person, like you create those bands and you just give it back to the entire class. It is feedback to them, yet it's not that kind of labor intensive as having to do it for every answer script. It helps. And occasionally it also gets them to understand if someone else has got more marks than me, then what is it that person has done? People also say that, what is helpful is if you have what they called a gold standard kind of paper and you kind of let them have a look at it, preferably from an earlier year, not from one of their own, peers, to say, okay, this is what you mean by a kind of an outstanding answer. And to be shown that this is an outstanding answer and where you stand is also feedback. I'm talking about institutional ways of doing it, wherein we recognize our own workloads, recognize our own, like I said, human frailties. But these are systemic methods which can be adopted and go a long way in telling students where they stand.
Thank you, Professor.
This is Nidish here, Professor. May I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is an extension of what Vishnu sir was pointing out, and also in the initial part of your presentation, you are saying when we are evaluating both the student and ourselves. So that is where this question comes from, particularly in online mode, right? So you give all your effort in your class, and then at the end of the year, you correct the papers. You start correcting, and then you figure that nothing that you worked in class have come across. So you correct like 10 papers and you see that nothing you communicated in the class has gone to them. Then you go into a space of self-doubt, and there comes a problem that you start giving them sympathy marks. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So how to deal with this? This pushes you into a ethical moral dilemma, and from there on you take time to come out of it. And at most times I don't go back to the papers for a long time once I finish this. How to tackle this, Professor?
I'm saying that, of course, you don't give them sympathy marks. I'm not even making a case for sympathy marks. But what I am sort of somewhere saying, Nidish, is this, that it's like, when I'm saying to look at ourselves, it's to work on this basis of, if across the board, the entire class, nobody's got it right, or at least majority of the class has not got it right, then a little bit of self-doubt is not bad. But I don't think that happens as such. It happens when maybe we genuinely got it wrong. And, or like, because see, the thing is that we are all recording our classes. I think you all are also doing it. So they have a way of revisiting what you did in class, which is much, much better than what was there in the offline mode, where if you missed the class, you missed the class. It was the end of the matter. So I think it's a kind of feedback to the students on this. This is something I'm going to insist upon. If you don't give me this, then don't expect to pass the course. And that should be said before and said any number of times. You should be like, what in administrative law we say, you give notice. I'm telling you beforehand that this is what is going to happen. And I'm telling you each time, that if this happens, then the burden of saying that I was unfair is on you. You establish it. I have told you that my questions are not going to, because of the online mode, because of other kind of difficulties, I am not going to ask you anything very dramatically out of what I'm teaching you. If you're not even going to listen to my recordings, or you're not going to be present in class, you're doing neither, and you do badly, then it's your funeral and you brought it. It's important to be forthrightly saying that to our students when this is what is happening. often the other also happens, is the point I'm making. Like the question that Vishnu Prasad asked me, the first question. I mean, sometimes it is that we haven't asked the most critical thing for which we want an answer. We want them to mind read us. And that's where it's important for us to admit to it, it is implicit in what I'm asking that that's also needed. But everybody is not good at reading implicit codes. To make it explicit is good. But the other point that you're making is, if we have gone to all that trouble, because all of us, at least I can tell you very much that since the online teaching happened, I think improved as giving lectures. I used to be horrible at it. I couldn't do it. I needed to have that conversation with students. I had to teach in that manner. I knew that it was stupid of me to try to have, histrionics with them on every day on whether they've read or they've not read, trying to work out a discussion in class. So I started doing 40-minute lectures of, saying that, "Theek hai, tum chup ke baith ke suno." I was not even insisting on reading, otherwise students would be thrown out of my classes. I would call off classes if they have not read and come for class. It was like a absolute non-negotiable. But I started using PowerPoints and started putting critical, sentences which I felt that had to get into their head so that they must learn. Then after that, to insist, okay, this is what I want to ask you and you're going to be doing it. If they don't do it, then they need to be failed. I think failing is as much a part of educating your students as to passing them and letting them do well. They have to earn it. That is very important. I was not in any which way trying to imply that if they have not earned it, we should give them. Because they will not value even when we give them good marks, because they'll say, "Are you just need to slash your wrists and this teacher will give you marks." That isn't to happen. I didn't mean that at all. But I did mean is, even when the student is not asking you for it, but you know that here is a student who was at point 2 and has worked hard to reach 4, maybe needs that little bit of a push to give that person a 5, is not sympathy, is recognizing the effort. And I think that recognizing of effort is an important part of teaching. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yes, Prof. That was a very thin line. I just wanted to clarify it. Thank you.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm saying, don't ever think that failing a student. There are times at which, it's like we shouldn't be killing with kindness. If we give them marks when they don't deserve it and we pass them when they should fail, we are ruining them for lives and we shouldn't do it.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Dear participants, any other questions? Any questions, any comments?
Any disagreements?
No, ma'am, this is Dr. Amita from VIT Law School, ma'am.
Yes.
It's not something like a disagreement and all. So usually in our, during this pandemic, our law school, we follow like open-ended questions. Because it is whenever we are giving an online examination, we know that students are always students. They will have a tendency to browse into multiple tabs, right, ma'am? So open-ended questions we used to go. So I was listening to your this thing. So here, when I am making an open-ended question, problem-based question, yes, ma'am. So in that particular question, I will be having a decision in my mind. Why the student will be giving his own reasoning and his own decision. So here, here, what is that? When I am evaluating, there will be an ethical and moral, as Nitish sir was telling. Some sort of ethical conflict will happen to me. Whether I have to go by judgment or I have to give recognition to the analytical skill of the student. So can you tell me about your opinion, ma'am, your experience regarding? I think you got my question.
Yeah, I got your question. Amika, if you remember, when I started my conversation itself, I had said there are 2 ways of looking at the whole question of where you want to put in evaluation. One is the point that you are making. Like I'm saying, when people give answer keys, They say this is the question and this is the answer. I have created the key and you can check with my key. I have checked, I have evaluated you on that basis. My issue is that if you're giving a problem-based question, it's inherent in a problem-based question that there is no one right answer. What you need to be then looking at is the answer that the student has given. Has he been able to or she been able to justify what they are doing? Is it a well-argued answer? Is it a credible answer? Okay, it's not your answer, but the answer that the student has given, is it a sustainable answer? If it is, then you have to, at least in my opinion, the ethical thing is if you don't give marks, then you are in effect saying, I'm the only one who knows everything, everyone else doesn't. See, we say that when we are doing education, we are making them adults and independent thinkers. That's the overarching objective of education, especially higher education. So when they start demonstrating that, yes, they are adults and can think for themselves, we give them a rap on the wrist that isn't good. Then what is going to happen is that even when they think next time, they'll say, better not give because she's not going to give me marks. And I'm going to be screwed over for the fact that I can think for myself. That was the point I was making. And that is only something that we have to be conscious of the fact. Which is why I've never been in favor of answer keys, not in law. I really do think, I'm not even in favor of answer keys in any of the other subjects, because it's not like if you're writing a social science thing, in history, there are so many different ways of approaching, which school of historiography you're in from. You could be making that same analysis very, very differently. You might have taken one approach as a teacher. There's no reason why the student is compelled to do the same. And I think that's important for us, that much of suspension of disbelief. But if the student is just being contrary, has not read anything, and is kind of bantuing gyan on you, like spouting knowledge without having really studied anything, kill them. They deserve to be killed. But where the student has really applied mind, I think it should be appreciated. One should say, I hadn't thought of it, but what you have thought is appreciable. It's like something I appreciate. I enjoyed reading it. Because even you don't get bored. See, Professor Sathe had once, I used to tell him that because I made this transition from research to teaching. So when I came to Nalsar as a full-fledged professor, I had never done this large volume of teaching. I started doing it in Nalsar. And like everybody else, the first exam paper I made was, like typical, very, like some information. Even the problems are coming from very direct kind of cases. So you know exactly what the answer is meant to be and all that stuff. I'll tell you, I got so bored at the end of doing that evaluation. I said, never again. But it meant that the cost of it was that you have to, if you are making a question which can have multiple answers, you have to read carefully every single answer script. So I told Professor Sathe, this is what I did. He said, that means now you will have to read every one of them. He said he had a colleague who used to look at, he would say, okay, this kind of song on Vivid Bharati, this one song is over, my paper is corrected. Because it becomes very mechanistic. You have set things that you are seeing, 1, 2, 5, this is done, okay, over. But if you are saying that not 1 to 5, it could be 3, 7, 8. And that's what you have done, but you've done it well. I have to read every single paper, but I would much rather do that because that's fun. The one where everybody is spouting the same thing to you is so boring, so boring. It's a killer. It's a killer for the teacher. And that's why I think we all hate to correct papers.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Amita ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Participants, any other questions? We are having only 1 minute.
Professor? Sir, may I?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Professor. Professor, this is Preetham from TNNLU. Professor, I would like your inputs with regard to the assessment of fast learners and slow learners, Professor. So this is something which we are finding it difficult in assessing the students based on the a normal evaluation method or the pattern which we follow for assessing either the CA or their examinations. So do we have any special methods, or you have followed any special methods to assess slow learners and fast learners, Professor?
See, one of the things which I did say, I had said that when you are designing the question paper, if you're designing the same for everybody in the first instance, you give space for all kinds of people. You know, like it shouldn't be that only the most brilliant people can handle your paper and the others have gone at the deep end. That's not a great idea. On the other hand, you may always have students who cannot make do with just this much of accommodation. I would somewhere say that look at the possibility of, because what we do is that we do a special exam, we'll do kind of coaching come exam, we'll do another way of where you sort of, the idea is that the evaluation should not become the critical thing, the learning should. So if the student requires more time to learn, then you work out those additional coaching things for them, and additional mentoring, and if required, another test. See, amongst the things which is, I think, beneficial in the National Law School system, if you use your discretion in a wise manner, is that you can individuate. And I think if you can, you should. If you're actually saying slow learners in the technical sense of the term, then I think requirements of disability rights and reasonable accommodation would also mandate that you create a special exam for that kind of student. Don't judge them on the same standards that you have created for others. It's not fair. It's like substantive equality, not just formal equality. You know, very often we believe that questions of administrative law or constitutional law are not for us. But I think that they are as much, whatever power we wield, when we wield that power, it should be done in recognition of good norms of good administrative law, as well as our constitutional obligations. I don't think we should only believe that, okay, you know, Supreme Court judges and the senior officials and politicians, they are the only ones who have to act in accordance with the Constitution. I think we are as much obligated. And we wield a lot of power, actually, if you ask me. Because how we kind of treat people determines what is going to be happening to them in life. I have a feeling you have gone past your time.
Yes, ma'am. Next, we are having the valedictory session at 3:30.
I know, that's why. I know a friend follows. I can't be taking on her time.
Yes, ma'am. Now I request Miranmoyi Mugarji, Assistant Professor of Law, Tamil Nadu National Law University, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon to one and all. I am Rinmoy Mukherjee, Assistant Professor of Law at TNNLU. I thank the FIP committee for giving me the opportunity to render the vote of thanks for this session conducted by Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda, who I had been privileged to be a student of while pursuing LLM at Nalsar in the year 2017-18. So on behalf of TNNLU, I thank Professor
They have
Dhanda.
fixed it. They shouldn't have, they've asked you, they fixed it.
For her, they just asked me, and I was really elated to be given the opportunity for this session. On the behalf of TNNLU, I thank Professor Dhanda for her session on the tools of evaluation, which has made us to rethink about how we design our evaluation tools and look at the exercise of evaluation itself, not just an exercise for the students, but for us teachers as well. I'm sure each and every participant here has immensely benefited from this session, and it will definitely help us in designing our tests and assessing the performance of the students for the courses that we teach. And I would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. V.S. Elizabeth, and our Registrar, Madam K.R. Leela, Senior Civil Judge, for their constant guidance and support for this FDP. I want to thank all the participants for the enthusiastic participation, and obviously I would like to thank the FIP committee for organizing this FDP. Lastly, I would like to thank the IT support team for their active support in managing this session online. Thank you everyone for being part of this session. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Amita, ma'am.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am. Now I request all the participants to join the valedictory session by using the separate link that you have shared in the chat box. Kindly join. Thank you all. Felix, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, please end the session, sir.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, please post the link again, sir.
Sir, where is the feedback, sir?
Ma'am,
Feedback
I'll
form.
share, ma'am.
Feedback for
Again, I'll share.
sir, it
Felix, sir,
disconnected
please.
in between, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Prema, ma'am, is it available, ma'am? Prema, ma'am.
Sir,
Hello, madam. Have you got the feedback link, ma'am? Okay, ma'am. Okay. Shall
sir,
I
I
end the
could
session,
not
ma'am?
unmute, sir.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Felix, sir. Then please
Yes, sir.
stop the recording and end the session, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Ma'am, please come and join the next session, ma'am. Felix, sir, please end the session.
Sir, I am not the host, sir. I am calling the IT department and ask them to
Okay,
end.
sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Sir, yeah,
Sir,
session.
yes, I have to start the valedictory session. Shall I leave?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.